A millionaire man saw a woman with the same bracelet his late mother had, and upon discovering her identity, he realized he had a sister who had been separated from him since birth. The night hung heavy over the city, like an oppressive blanket that wouldn't allow Alexander's mind to find peace. Still unable to understand how the world continued to turn, he felt that every day since his mother's death had been an echo of a void he didn't know how to fill. Alexander had spent months in a trance-like state, fulfilling his duties as the renowned businessman everyone knew, but inside, everything seemed meaningless. Seated in his office, Alexander let his eyes linger on an object that had become his most cherished possession since the funeral. An old silver bracelet with interlinked links, once belonging to his mother, Andrei. Alexander held it between his hands almost reverently, allowing his fingers to trace every detail, every groove worn by the passage of time. That piece of jewelry was more than just an inheritance. It was the only tangible connection he had left to his mother, now that she was gone. He remembered how, since childhood, that bracelet had symbolized special moments. Andrei always wore it in important situations, though Alexander never asked why. He could still picture her in his mind, raising an eyebrow with that warm, enigmatic smile when he tried to touch it. "No, Alexander," she would say in those moments, her tone soft but firm. "This bracelet is a talisman. It's worn only when the heart asks for it." The strength with which Andrei had faced life had always inspired him. A woman who, against all odds, had managed to provide him with a safe home, stability, and above all, a constant lesson in resilience. To Alexander, she was a living example of strength, and he had grown up wanting to repay her for everything she had given him, wishing to be someone worthy of her sacrifice. Now, with the bracelet in his hands, Alexander felt a wave of sadness that he couldn't quell. His mind began to wander, flooded with questions. How had his mother endured loneliness? Why had she never shared more details about her past? Despite how close they had been, Andrei had always been a reserved woman when it came to her history. He knew her childhood had been tough, and her life had been marked by overcoming obstacles, but he had never pressed for more. She had, in some way, always made him feel that he didn't need to know more, that what mattered was the present, the effort, and the dedication that built their relationship. But now, Alexander couldn't help but feel that he had been left with an incomplete version of his mother. Was there something in her life he had never understood? That idea gnawed at him, and despite knowing there was no turning back, Alexander felt an almost desperate urge to learn more about her, to understand her completely, now that he couldn't ask. The night dragged on slowly, and the silence in the office seemed to pull him deeper into his grief. He closed his eyes, and memories came to him like fragments of an ancient story. The laughter in the small apartment they shared, the afternoons when she waited for him with dinner ready after long days of work and study. She had been his rock, his role model, and in his memory, Alexander felt she was almost invincible. Suddenly, Alexander opened his eyes and looked at the bracelet, as if he expected to find an answer in it, a trace of something that would show him that a part of his mother remained. He turned it over in his hands and noticed an engraving on the inside that had gone unnoticed until then. Though the letters were somewhat blurry, he could make out two initials, I and C. Intrigue filled him. His mother had never mentioned anything about those initials, and he couldn't recall anyone in his family with those letters in their names. With his heart racing and his mind a mix of pain and curiosity, Alexander once again felt the absence of Andrei as an abyss he couldn't fill. He couldn't bear the thought of not knowing what those initials meant, or why the bracelet had been so important to her. Something inside him told him that this object held a deeper meaning, a hidden message that perhaps his mother had never wanted to share, but now, in her absence, seemed to be calling out to him. He stayed in his office a little longer, contemplating the bracelet and trying to understand his mother's legacy, searching his mind for any clue, any forgotten memory. Alexander knew that finding answers wouldn't bring him back to the past or bring Andrei back, but he also understood that until he knew, a part of him wouldn't be able to fully accept her departure. Finally, he placed the bracelet in his pocket, but his mind was already made up. If finding the meaning behind this object could give him peace or any clue about Andrea's past, he would do it. He knew the road ahead might not be easy, but he couldn't afford to leave any questions unanswered. Life had taught him that every decision mattered, and that night he decided his mother owed him one last truth. Alexander looked at himself in the mirror, adjusting his tie with meticulous movements. The charity gala organized by one of the associations his company collaborated with each year was about to begin, but he felt no excitement. In other times, these social gatherings, where connections were made and alliances formed, would have been one of his favorite activities. This time, however, he felt distant, as if he were about to attend someone else's event. Since his mother's death, the large gatherings and superficial conversations at these events felt emptier than ever. However, he was aware of the importance of his presence. Despite his grief, his company remained a key part of his life, and though his heart wasn't in the gala, he knew that his absence would raise questions among his partners. When he arrived at the luxurious event hall, Alexander stayed near the entrance, observing the surroundings without much intention of mingling. Golden lights illuminated the space, reflecting off the glass and elegant decorations. The laughter and murmurs of the guests filled the air, while waiters passed by with trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. For anyone else, the scene would have been perfect. However, Alexander only felt a weight on his chest that reminded him of how much he missed Andrea. Alexander tried to push away his sadness by focusing on trivial conversations. He greeted a few acquaintances, attended to key partners, and listened, almost disinterested, to discussions about the organization's new charity projects. He barely participated in the exchanges, his responses automatic, and soon he decided to step aside, walking toward a quieter corner of the hall. As his gaze wandered, searching for distraction, something caught his attention. Across the room, a woman stood out among the guests. Dressed simply, with a calm aura and serene gaze, she seemed detached from the superficial atmosphere around them. It wasn't her attire or presence, but the authenticity she radiated, an authenticity Alexander rarely encountered at such events. For reasons he couldn't explain, he felt compelled to observe her more closely. It was then that he noticed something that made him freeze for a moment. On her wrist, the woman wore a bracelet identical to his mother's. Alexander's heart skipped a beat. The same interlinked links, the old design, even the wear on the engraving, seemed identical to the bracelet he cherished so much. His curiosity overcame him. Without stopping to think, he began to walk toward her, with slow but determined steps, as if the coincidence compelled him to approach. The woman, who was standing with a group of people admiring a series of paintings, looked at him with a faint smile as Alexander drew near. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice that bracelet you're wearing," Alexander said softly, trying to ensure his words didn't sound intrusive. The woman looked at him with a curious expression, unsure of what he was referring to. "It looks a lot like one that belonged to someone very important to me." She smiled, nodding as she gently touched the bracelet as if it were a cherished object. "It's a keepsake from my biological mother," she explained, a note of nostalgia in her voice. "My mother passed away when I was very young, but she always wore this bracelet. For me, it's a way to keep something of her with me, even though I barely remember her." Alexander was struck by the coincidence, and as he tried to maintain his composure, he felt as though an abyss had opened beneath his feet. What were the odds that someone else would have such a similar object and share such a meaningful connection with him? "It's strange, isn't it?" Alexander remarked, observing the bracelet closely. "My mother's bracelet is identical. She also kept it as something very special, though she never explained why." The woman nodded, her gaze seeming to search for an explanation in Alexander's face. After a few moments of silence, she extended her hand. "I'm Tara," she introduced herself with a warm smile and a simplicity that brought Alexander an odd sense of calm. "Alexander, it's a pleasure, Tara." They both fell silent for a moment, as if the connection they had found through the bracelet required time to process. Tara, now more at ease in his company, explained that she worked as an art teacher and was attending the gala as a companion to some of her students, whose works had been selected for the charity exhibition. Alexander listened attentively, fascinated by the way Tara spoke about her work, with genuine enthusiasm and authenticity that he rarely found in the people around him. The simplicity of her presence and her view of art as an emotional refuge sparked in him a mix of admiration and, somehow, a longing for a simpler life without so many pressures. For Alexander, the coincidence of the bracelet went beyond a mere accessory. It was as if the object he valued so much was meant to guide him towards something or someone, though he still didn't know exactly why. With a strange blend of unease and curiosity, Alexander decided to share a little about his own bracelet and its importance to him. He told her how his mother used to keep it, and how, now that she had passed, that small object had gained immense value in his life. Tara listened with interest, but something in her words seemed to resonate with her on a deeper level. When Alexander mentioned noticing the initials inside the bracelet, she looked at hers with some intensity. "Mine also has an engraving," she revealed, her voice tinged with surprise. "My mother told me it had something to do with our family history, but I never fully understood it. My biological mother passed away when I was a baby, and I never had the chance to ask her about her past." For Alexander, the exchange of these coincidences only deepened the mystery. He felt an inexplicable connection with Tara, as if that bracelet were a thread that tied them together in invisible yet profound ways. When the conversation finally came to an end, Alexander realized that something within him had shifted. Though he didn't understand why, he knew that meeting Tara and discovering that coincidence had opened a door that perhaps he was meant to walk through. That encounter and that identical bracelet would linger in his thoughts long after they both left the gala. That night, as he returned home, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Tara and the mystery of the two bracelets. Was there something in his mother's past that he had never known? Why did he feel such a deep connection with this unknown woman? Tara's image and the bracelet continued to haunt his mind, stirring up an urgency to find answers that, until now, he hadn't even realized he needed. Alexander couldn't sleep that night. The image of Tara, with the identical bracelet to his mother's, appeared in his mind again and again, as if every detail of that encounter was pushing him toward a truth he still couldn't comprehend. By dawn, he rose from his bed, unable to remain in the stillness of his bedroom. He headed to his office, where his mother's bracelet lay on his desk, as if it too were waiting for him to take the next step. He turned on the desk lamp and sat in his chair, observing the bracelet with renewed intensity. Up until that night at the gala, Alexander had never thought that the object might hold any mystery. To him, his mother's bracelet had been a symbol of their connection, a talisman she wore with devotion, and now, after her passing, it represented the essence of Andrei, the woman who raised him and pushed him to be the man he was. But meeting Tara had disrupted that view, filling him with questions. Still staring at the bracelet, Alexander recalled something he had overlooked until now, the engraved letters inside. I and C. That night, under the light, those initials had seemed like something entirely new, something his mother never mentioned, and now they resonated in his mind like a veiled clue. "What do these initials mean?" he murmured to himself, running his fingers over the worn engraving. Why did she never talk about this? Alexander's mind began to sift through every conversation he had had with his mother, every childhood memory, trying to find any reference that could give him a clue about those initials or the significance of the bracelet. But even as he scoured his memory, he couldn't recall anything that suggested his mother was hiding such a secret. The idea that Andrei might have kept something so important from him filled him with a strange mix of sadness and confusion. She had always been his role model, a woman whose life was marked by hard work, someone who overcame enormous difficulties to give him the life he had. But was there something in her history that she had preferred not to share? Alexander couldn't reconcile the image of the strong woman he knew with the possibility that she had hidden something so significant. Finally, feeling the need to understand, he took his phone and searched for the contact of someone he trusted with delicate matters. Luis, the private investigator who had worked with him on some complex business issues. If anyone could help him unravel the mystery of the bracelet and discover more about his mother's history, it was him. Alexander took a deep breath before sending a message to Luis, asking him to meet the next day in his office. Although the mystery of the bracelet seemed trivial compared to the investigations Luis was accustomed to, Alexander felt an urgency he couldn't ignore. He had the sense that this object, and the initials engraved on it, held a fragment of the truth about his mother, a part of her life that he needed to know, now more than ever. The night passed in silence, and Alexander spent the rest of it lost in thought, holding the bracelet as if, somehow, it could absorb the answers he sought. Finally, at dawn, he fell asleep in his office, exhausted from the tension and intrigue that had gripped him since meeting Tara. The next day, Luis arrived promptly for the meeting. Alexander greeted him in his office with a serious, somewhat restrained expression, unsure of how to begin explaining what had been weighing on his mind. After all, asking a private investigator to investigate a bracelet seemed unusual, almost absurd, but Alexander felt there was no other way. "Luis, thanks for coming," Alexander began, inviting him to sit. Luis nodded attentively, his patient expression one that Alexander greatly appreciated. "I know what I'm asking may seem unusual, but I need you to help me uncover a mystery that, although it seems personal, might be very important to me." Luis nodded without asking any questions. Alexander took a breath and, with a mixture of emotions, began telling him about his mother's bracelet, the initials engraved inside, and Andrei's recent passing. He described the encounter with Tara and how the coincidence of the identical bracelet had awakened a restlessness he couldn't quell. "I need to know if there's any connection between Tara and my mother, Andrei. I'm not sure what I'm looking for, but I feel like this bracelet is a piece of something much bigger. And even though my mother is no longer here to explain it to me, I believe you can help me uncover it," Alexander concluded, watching Luis for his reaction. Luis carefully examined the bracelet, studying the initials and the unique design of the interwoven links. Seeing the engraving, a look of interest crossed his face, and Alexander noticed that Luis was taking the matter as seriously as he would any important case. "I'll do everything I can, Alexander," Luis said, handing back the bracelet. "I'll start by investigating the origin of this design. Maybe the engraving and the manufacturing details will give us a clue. And if possible, I'll look into the family of this woman, Tara, to see if there's any connection that could help us understand why she has such a similar bracelet." Alexander felt a slight sense of relief at hearing Luis's response. He had feared his request might seem like an unfounded fantasy, but Luis's seriousness and willingness to investigate confirmed that his instincts weren't wrong. Even though he didn't know exactly what he was looking for, Alexander was convinced that he needed to follow this path. When Luis left, Alexander was alone in his office, feeling restless yet determined. He trusted that Luis would unravel the mystery, even if it was a strange case full of unanswered questions. For the first time since Andrei's death, Alexander felt he was getting closer to something that would bring him peace, or at least answers. That night, as he tried to rest, the image of Tara and the bracelet returned to his mind. He wondered if she had also noticed the coincidence, if perhaps fate had brought her into his life so that he could uncover Andrei's hidden story. And for a moment, between weariness and doubt, Alexander allowed hope to filter into his thoughts. Though the road ahead was full of uncertainty, Alexander knew he had taken the first step toward a truth that had remained in the shadows for far too long. He knew that every answer he uncovered could change the way he saw his mother and himself, but he was ready to face it. Alexander waited impatiently in his office, his gaze fixed on the door, waiting for Luis's arrival. Only a few days had passed since he asked the detective to start the investigation, but for Alexander, each hour felt like an eternity. The weight of the unanswered questions and the uncertainty about his mother's past kept him restless, and though he tried to focus on his business affairs, his mind always returned to the bracelet, the engraved initials, and Tara. Finally, the door opened, and Luis entered with a folder in hand, his face focused. Alexander gestured for him to sit across from him, trying to contain the anxiety that overwhelmed him. "Alexander," Luis began, arranging his notes and observing his friend with a look that mixed professionalism with concern. "I've investigated some preliminary aspects about the bracelet and this woman, Tara, like you asked. So far, the results have been interesting, to say the least." Alexander leaned forward, hanging on to every word. "First, let me tell you that this bracelet has quite an unusual design. It's not a common piece. It was made several decades ago, and the pattern of the interwoven links is something I've only seen in antique jewelry with significant sentimental value, or, in some cases, familial symbolism. Apparently, this kind of jewelry was custom-made, which means it wasn't a mass-produced piece. It was likely designed specifically for someone, or even part of a family tradition." Alexander listened in silence, processing every detail. This revelation confirmed what he had suspected. The bracelet wasn't just an accessory. It had a deeper backstory, something his mother never mentioned. However, Luis had not yet reached the most intriguing part of his investigation. "Now, as for Tara," Luis took a breath, as if deciding how to approach the next topic. "I made some inquiries into her family history, and I found something that's going to interest you a lot. Tara was adopted when she was a baby. The woman she considers her mother, in fact, is her adoptive mother." Alexander felt a shiver at hearing this. The news left him motionless, as a sense of surprise and disbelief overwhelmed him. "Adopted?" he murmured, almost to himself. "That's completely unexpected." Luis nodded, observing Alexander's reaction carefully. "Exactly. Tara is not the biological daughter of the woman who raised her. Her biological mother passed away when she was very young, and from what I've gathered, the adoption was a decision made under difficult circumstances. But I haven't yet found all the information about her biological mother. The records are somewhat old, and I'm still looking into it." Alexander fell silent, processing the information. The pieces of the puzzle seemed to be falling into place in strange ways, but there were still key fragments missing. Tara's story, marked by adoption, added a new layer of mystery to their connection. He wondered if Andrea had known something about this, or if, like him, his mother had also carried difficult secrets. Luis continued, aware that Alexander needed more answers. "There's one more thing, Alexander," he added, his voice now reflecting the seriousness of the moment. "I found documents that suggest Tara's biological mother had a very close connection to your mother, Andrea. Apparently, they had family ties, though I'm still not sure what kind of relationship they shared." Alexander felt a shiver run down his spine. The idea that his mother and Tara's biological mother were somehow connected seemed almost surreal. If this was true, then his bond with Tara went far beyond mere coincidence. Something inside him told him that this was only the beginning of a complex story, one that Andrea had decided to keep silent. "Do you think they could have been relatives?" Alexander asked, trying to contain the anxiety building within him. Luis nodded slowly. "It's very likely. I'm still investigating, but so far the records point to a family relationship. They could have been sisters, cousins, or some other close relatives. But this would also explain the identical bracelets. Perhaps they were a symbol of a bond they both shared and wanted to pass down to their children." Alexander leaned back in his chair, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the revelation. If Andrea and Tara's biological mother were related, then the connection between him and Tara was much deeper than he had ever imagined. The possibility that Andrea had hidden such an important family tie filled him with a mix of sadness and confusion. Why had his mother never mentioned this relationship? Why had she chosen to remain silent, allowing this secret to stay hidden until now? Luis continued his report with a tone of understanding. "I'll keep investigating, Alexander. I'll search through older records and civil files that might shed light on the connection between your mother and Tara's biological mother. This is a delicate case, and I'm sure there are more layers to this story. Maybe there are letters, family documents, or witnesses that can give us more information. But I want you to know that this might take some time." Alexander nodded, still processing the revelations. He knew he was about to delve into a story that could change his life forever, but he also understood that he couldn't stop now. What had started as a simple curiosity about a bracelet was transforming into an investigation about his own identity and his mother's history. "Thank you, Luis," Alexander said, looking at him with gratitude and determination. "This means a lot to me. I want to know the truth, no matter what I find. And if there's more about Tara's mother, about her life and the bond she shared with my mother, I need to know." Luis nodded, understanding and committed. "I understand, Alexander. I'll do everything I can to find out." With a handshake, Luis left, leaving Alexander with the certainty that he was in good hands. Alone in his office, Alexander picked up his mother's bracelet again and held it between his fingers, feeling its texture, the weight of its history, and what it represented. That bracelet, now more than ever, was a symbol of an unknown past, a window into a family history buried under years of secrets. Alexander, determined to get to the bottom of it all, knew that his search had only just begun. The mystery of his mother and the connection to Tara had become more than just a coincidence. It was a door to a hidden past that was about to reveal unexpected truths. That day, Alexander mentally prepared himself to face whatever was necessary. The answers, he thought, could bring both comfort and pain, but he was ready to confront them. Even if the process was slow and painful, he felt that in the end, he would understand his mother's legacy and perhaps discover a side of himself he had never known. Luis's words continued to resonate in Alexander's mind as he tried to focus on his work, but it was futile. The revelation that Tara had been adopted and that her biological mother might be connected to Andrei had destabilized everything he thought he knew about his own family. The mystery of the bracelet and the engraved initials were only the surface of something much deeper and possibly painful. That night, Luis called him. He had found something else. Alexander answered quickly, and Luis's words were direct. "Alexander, I've found more information about Tara's biological mother. According to the documents, her mother was Carol Cortez. And, if my suspicions are correct, Carol and Andrea didn't just share any connection. They were sisters." Alexander's world seemed to stop. Luis's words hit him with an unexpected force. Andrea and Carol were sisters, meaning Tara's biological mother was also his aunt. The connection with Tara went far beyond the coincidence of the bracelets. Now he understood that they shared the same blood, and there was a much more intricate family story than he had ever imagined. Alexander felt his body tense up, his breath growing heavy as his mind began to spin with a single question. Why had Andrea never spoken to him about Carol? If his mother and aunt had such a close bond that they both had identical bracelets, why hide her existence? "What else have you found about Carol?" Alexander asked, trying to calm himself and organize his thoughts. Luis paused before responding, as if carefully choosing his words. "So far, what we know is that Carol and Andrea grew up in difficult circumstances, without many resources, in a small town up north. According to some records, Carol left the town at an early age, and apparently she faced many struggles on her own. In fact, there's a suspicion that Carol had a child before moving to the city, but I haven't been able to confirm anything concrete yet." Alexander felt a pang of curiosity and fear. Carol's story seemed complicated, full of ups and downs and decisions that had likely cost her much. But one question still tormented him. Was there an even bigger secret in that story? I'll keep investigating, Alexander. I need to access adoption records and some older files that could give us information about Carol's children. Your mother and her sister's lives seem to have been full of challenges and tough decisions, Luis added, his tone serious. Thank you, Luis. I trust that you'll find the answers we're looking for, Alexander replied, trying to maintain his composure, though the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind grew louder and stronger. Alexander hung up and sat in silence, holding the phone in his hand. The idea that Carol might have had a child before Tara continued to trouble him, as if that detail was the key to an enigma he had yet to solve. He got up from his desk and almost instinctively went to the drawer where he kept his mother's bracelet. He took it out and observed it under the light, as if looking for answers to the new questions that flooded his mind. Then, something incredible happened. As he turned the bracelet, he noticed that the engraving of the initials wasn't as worn as he had thought. The light revealed details that had previously gone unnoticed, and Alexander realized that, in addition to the initials I and C, there was a small mark he had never seen before. A symbol, perhaps a flower, or a tiny star. Though he couldn't interpret it clearly, he felt that this detail held a meaning he still didn't understand. With this new revelation, Alexander began to piece things together in his mind. Could it be that the bracelet not only symbolized the bond between Andrea and Carol, but also something more? Was it some sort of family inheritance or a symbol of a promise they both shared? Alexander knew there was a hidden story in those symbols, a story that, for some reason, his mother had decided not to tell him. As the night went on, Alexander tried to organize the fragments of information he had gathered so far. Carol, his mother's lost sister, a woman who, according to Luis, had lived a life full of difficulties and sacrifices. Tara, the woman with whom he shared an inexplicable connection and who now he knew was his cousin. And that bracelet, the only object that could give him clues about a story of sacrifice and family secrets. That night, before going to bed, Alexander made a decision. He needed to meet Tara again, not as the interesting woman he had met at the gala, but as someone who shared a blood tie. If she also wore an identical bracelet, then maybe she could help him decipher the mystery that Andrea and her sister had kept silent. The following days were an endless wait while Luis continued his investigation, but Alexander couldn't wait any longer. He decided to contact Tara directly and invited her for coffee. During their meeting, he observed Tara with a renewed look, knowing that she too had the right to know the story they both shared. After a superficial conversation, Alexander gathered his courage and mentioned the bracelet. Tara, somewhat surprised, agreed to show him her jewel. She took it out of her purse and placed it on the table, revealing that it also had the initials I and C, along with the same small symbol that he had noticed on his mother's bracelet. Alexander was speechless. Seeing both bracelets together, identical down to the smallest details, confirmed to him that this object was not just a simple piece of jewelry. It was a key to his past, a symbol of a sibling love that had transcended time and secrets. Tara looked at him, noticing his expression of confusion and curiosity. Alexander, I know this may seem strange, but I feel like this bracelet is more than just a memory of my biological mother. I've always felt that somehow it was meant to tell me something I still don't understand. Alexander nodded, feeling her words echoing his own thoughts. I think you're right, Tara. I feel the same way. After our last conversation, I started investigating my mother and discovered things I never imagined. Things that involve you too. Tara looked at him, visibly surprised, and Alexander felt it was time to share the truth he had uncovered. Tara, according to the documents I've reviewed, our connection isn't just a coincidence. My mother, Andrea, and your biological mother, Carol, were sisters. That means you and I are cousins. Tara stared at him in silence, trying to process the information. A mix of surprise, disbelief, and shock reflected on her face. Sisters. Our mothers were sisters, she repeated softly, as if trying to understand the magnitude of what he was revealing. Alexander nodded, giving her time to absorb the news. They both sat in silence for a moment, sharing the realization that, no matter how or why, their lives were connected in a deep and powerful way. Finally, Tara looked at the bracelet on the table, then at Alexander, and took a deep breath. If our mothers shared this bond and decided to leave us these bracelets, there must be a reason for this to come to us. I feel like there's something more we need to discover together, something our mothers may never have been able to tell us. Alexander nodded, sharing her same determination. I agree, Tara. I think this is just the beginning. There's a story here that deserves to be known, and I won't stop until I understand the legacy our mothers left for us. That meeting sealed both of their commitments to unravel the truth, no matter where it would take them. Though they still didn't fully understand the meaning of the bracelet, they knew that their search for answers would lead them to understand the sacrifice and the history that Carol and Andrea had left behind as an echo that now resonated in their own lives. Luis's investigation would continue, and Alexander and Tara, united by blood and by the memory of their mothers, would begin a journey into the past, determined to discover all that those bracelets represented. Alexander and Tara found themselves again at the cafe where they had shared their first deep conversation, but this time the atmosphere was different. They both felt closer, bound by a blood tie that until recently they hadn't known. As the mystery of their mothers slowly unfolded, a new bond began to form between them, filled with complicity and a strange peace. Though the truth was shocking, both felt they were meant to meet. While having coffee, Alexander couldn't help but observe Tara's thoughtful expression as she gazed at her bracelet, a mixture of curiosity and nostalgia in her eyes. For her, discovering the connection with Alexander and learning that her biological mother had been Andrea's sister had changed the way she saw her own past. Everything she had once taken for granted, her family, her history, now had new dimensions that she was still struggling to fully understand. Suddenly, Alexander's phone vibrated. It was a message from Luis. He had found something important and asked to meet with them as soon as possible. Alexander quickly responded and explained to Tara that Luis had new information. Both of them felt a surge of anticipation, mixed with a latent fear of what they might discover. However, the determination to find answers was stronger than any fear. An hour later, they were in Alexander's office, waiting for Luis. When he finally arrived, the detective greeted them with a serious expression and a couple of folders under his arm. He sat in front of them, took a deep breath, and began his report. Alexander, Tara, Luis started, his voice calm and clear. After investigating Carol and your mother Andrea's background, I found some documents and testimonies that clarify the bond they shared, and I must say that the results are surprising. Alexander and Tara exchanged a look, feeling the tension in the room grow. According to the records I found, Carol and Andrea were not only sisters. They shared a very close relationship from a young age, especially since both of them went through a childhood and adolescence marked by adversity. However, it was Carol who faced the toughest trials, which deeply marked her life. Apparently, she had a complicated and difficult love affair that was not approved by the family. From that relationship, Alexander was born. Luis's words resonated in the room like a harsh dose of reality that Alexander hadn't expected. The revelation left him breathless, and a wave of disbelief, pain, and confusion took over him. Was he the son of Carol? The woman who had raised him as her own mother was in fact his aunt. He tried to maintain composure, but he felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. "It can't be," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. "Was Carol my biological mother?" Luis nodded, giving him space to process the news. "Yes, Alexander. Andrea, your adoptive mother, was Carol's sister, and the one who decided to take on the responsibility of raising you as if you were her own son. According to the documents and some testimonies I found, Carol was in a desperate situation at that time and had no family support. Andrea, seeing the difficulties Carol was going through, offered to adopt you and give you a stable life. Tara, still shocked by the news, placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder in a supportive gesture. The emotions of both were raw. Alexander could hardly absorb the radical turn his story had just taken. Everything he had believed he knew about Andrea and about himself was crumbling. Luis continued, understanding the magnitude of what they were processing. Andrea and Carol made this arrangement in private. Carol, although she deeply loved her son, accepted the proposal with pain, understanding that it would be the best thing for you. It was a decision she didn't take lightly. Her intention was for you to grow up without the difficulties and instability she was facing at that time. Alexander didn't know how to react. His love for Andrea was still there, unwavering, but the revelation that Carol was his biological mother filled his heart with a sadness he didn't know how to handle. Andrea, the woman he had loved and revered, had kept this secret all her life. Anger and sadness intertwined within him as he tried to comprehend the sacrifices and decisions both women had made. Tara, for her part, was trying to process that Carol had not only been Alexander's biological mother, but hers as well. This meant that Carol, her biological mother, had lived a life of separation and sacrifice, giving up her children so they could have a better life. The two bracelets, then, didn't just symbolize a bond between sisters, but also the invisible link between Alexander and Tara, united by a mother's love that had given them up for love. "But that's not all," Luis said, his expression grave, making it clear there was more to say. "According to the documents I found, Carol gave Tara up for adoption a few years after she had given you, Alexander, away. When she had Tara, she was in an even more complicated situation, and without Andrea's support, she had no other option but to place her for adoption. Everything seems to indicate that, though their decisions were painful, both were guided by their desire to offer them a better life." Tara lowered her gaze, her eyes filled with tears. She knew that her biological mother had gone through hardships, but she never imagined that this woman, whom she had never known, had made such heartbreaking decisions. The weight of that sacrifice filled her with a mix of pain and gratitude. Carol had done the unthinkable, and that bracelet, which she had always considered a symbol of affection, was, in reality, a reminder of a mother who had loved them in silence and had hoped that someday they would understand her decisions. Alexander took a deep breath, trying to process all the revelations. He felt a mixture of confusion, anger, and a deep emptiness. Carol, his biological mother, had sacrificed everything for him, and although he understood the circumstances, the pain of not knowing this truth before Andrea passed was overwhelming. Luis gave them a moment to digest the information before speaking again. "Alexander, Tara, although their stories have been marked by sacrifice and silence, I believe the truth you've discovered offers you a unique opportunity. Your mothers did all of this out of love, even though that love was expressed through painful decisions. You both have the opportunity to give meaning to this story, to find in these bracelets and in your connection a way to heal." Tara nodded, taking Alexander's hand as a sign of support. "I believe our mothers left us these bracelets not just as a memory of their love, but also as a symbol of the hope they had that someday we would meet and understand them," Tara said, her voice full of emotion. Alexander looked at the bracelet on his wrist, and although the pain was still there, something inside him began to shift. He was starting to understand that Andrea and Carol had made difficult decisions to protect him, to offer him a future. Although the truth had come too late for Andrea, he felt that the best way to honor her was to accept it with gratitude and respect. "I think you're right, Tara," Alexander replied, letting out a deep sigh. "Now that we know the truth, we have the opportunity to give everything a new meaning. Our mothers did what they thought was right, and their love still remains with us through these bracelets. It's time to understand that the truth doesn't diminish the merit or love in their sacrifices. Luis, seeing how both of them were beginning to reconcile with the story, stood up with a respectful expression. "I wish you both the best of luck on this journey. If there's anything else you need from me, I'll be here to help." After Luis left, Alexander and Tara remained in silence for a long time. Finally, Tara looked at him and with a faint smile broke the silence. "Maybe it's time to stop focusing on what we never had and start valuing what we have now. Our story wasn't the one we imagined, but that doesn't mean we can't give it a new beginning." Alexander nodded, taking his sister's hand. Despite the pain and the secrets revealed, they both understood that this encounter was a second chance, a bridge to transform the past into something full of meaning and peace. That night, Alexander and Tara began to write a new chapter in their lives together, determined to discover the legacy that Carol and Andrea had left for them, and to live the love of their mothers the way they always intended. Alexander and Tara were still processing the shocking revelations about their origins when, a few days later, Luis contacted them again. This time his tone was serious, and he reserved a piece of news that would completely change their perception of their mothers and the sacrifice they had made. Alexander and Tara met in Alexander's office, where Luis arrived with a folder that seemed much heavier than usual. His face reflected the seriousness of a man who understood that what he was about to reveal would transform the lives of those listening. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Alexander said, noticing the tension in Luis's expression. Luis sat down, and after a brief pause, he looked at both of them with compassion and determination. "What I'm going to tell you will probably be hard to take in," Luis began, choosing his words carefully. "I've continued investigating old files and family records, and what I've found reveals a truth none of us suspected. Carol and Andrea didn't just share a life full of difficult decisions and sacrifices. In reality, they shared something much deeper and more difficult." Alexander and Tara exchanged anxious looks. They had begun to think they knew the whole story, that the sacrifice of their mothers was the central piece of their connection. But Luis's words indicated that there was something even deeper. Luis took a deep breath before continuing. "I've confirmed that Carol was the one who gave birth to both of you. Alexander, Carol was your biological mother, but she was also Tara's. You're not just cousins, as you thought, you're biological siblings." A deafening silence filled the room. Alexander and Tara looked at each other, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just heard. The revelation that they were siblings, children of the same mother, Carol, added a layer of emotional complexity neither of them had anticipated. Alexander felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath his feet, as if his identity were wavering. This discovery shook everything he thought he knew about his life and the place he occupied in it. Andrea, the woman he had loved as a mother, turned out to be his aunt, while Carol, the distant, unknown figure, was the woman who gave him life. And now he discovered he shared not just a distant connection with Tara, but the same blood tie. This can't be," Alexander murmured, unable to find the words to express the storm of emotions he felt. "All my life, I've lived a lie." Tara, still in shock, took Alexander's hand, seeking some form of comfort amidst the confusion. She too was trying to process the fact that she hadn't just been separated from her biological mother, but also from her brother. Both had grown up without the opportunity to meet, to live as siblings, to build a fraternal relationship from the start. The pain and sadness engulfed them in silence. Luis watched as they both struggled to understand the enormity of the revelation and continued in a compassionate tone. "I know this is a lot to process. Carol, your biological mother, was caught in extremely difficult circumstances. From what I've discovered, she had very few options at the time. Andrea, unable to have children of her own, offered to raise Alexander to give him a stable life. Carol accepted, knowing that Andrea would provide a safe home and the love she couldn't give in her situation. Giving Alexander to Andrea was a decision filled with love, but also deep pain. Tara squeezed Alexander's hand, offering a small gesture of support. I understand that Carol did this out of love, and so did Andrea, but I can't help but feel abandoned, Alexander said, his voice breaking. Why didn't they tell me the truth? Why didn't they give me the chance to know Carol, to know I had a sister? Luis nodded, showing empathy in his expression. I understand, Alexander. It's natural to feel this way. Carol and Andrea made difficult decisions, and perhaps they didn't want this truth to affect the love and loyalty you felt for Andrea. From what I've gathered, Andrea kept the secret out of respect for Carol's sacrifice and to protect both of your emotional well-being. She wanted you to grow up without the burden of such a complicated history. Tara wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek, trying to view the situation from a broader perspective. Maybe they both thought they were doing the right thing. Maybe they thought they were protecting us, even if it meant separating us and hiding the truth from us, she said, trying to find comfort in her own words. Alexander nodded, though the pain still lingered inside him. He was beginning to understand that, although his mothers made difficult decisions, they did so driven by love and sacrifice. The weight of the truth was immense, but he also felt a glimmer of understanding, of empathy for those two women who had loved him in silence and did what they believed was best for him. Luis continued, revealing the final piece of the puzzle. Years later, Carol faced an even more complicated situation when she had Tara. She was already alone, without Andrea's help, and in a critical financial situation. She decided to put Tara up for adoption to another family, believing it would offer her a better life. And both women kept the secret of their sacrifice, carrying with them the pain and the hope that, one day, if fate allowed, their children would reunite and understand the love behind their decision. Alexander and Tara remained silent, feeling the weight of each word. The bracelets, which had until now only been symbols of their mothers, were now the testimony of a love that transcended time and distance. Alexander felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude toward Andrea and Carol. Though both had chosen silence, they did so with the hope of protecting them. Finally, Alexander broke the silence, his voice trembling. Tara, we're siblings. We don't just share a story of sacrifice, we share the same blood, the same origin. Despite the pain, I believe our mothers did the best they could with what they had. Now our duty is to honor that story, to understand it, and give it a new purpose. Tara nodded, looking at him with tears in her eyes and a slight smile. Though the pain was still there was also a connection she had never felt before, a new strength that united them. You're right, Alexander. We've lived separate lives, but now we're together. If our mothers left us these bracelets as a symbol of their love, it's our responsibility to continue that legacy and not allow their sacrifice to have been in vain. They both looked at Luis, grateful for his help in unraveling such a difficult truth. Luis bid them farewell, knowing that the next stage of the journey was theirs alone. Alexander and Tara remained in the office in silence, their hands joined, contemplating the magnitude of what they had discovered. That day, Alexander and Tara understood that the truth, however painful, had given them something more valuable than anything else, the gift of finding each other. And although the scars of the past would remain, they had the chance to build a relationship based on understanding, love, and respect for the sacrifice of their mothers. From that moment on, they both decided that they would not only seek answers about their origins, but would work together to honor the memory of Carol and Andrea. Those women had made difficult decisions in the name of love, and they, now as siblings, would find a way to transform that legacy into something positive, something that reflected the strength of their mothers and the bond that united them forever. In time, Alexander and Tara would learn to heal, to understand, and to build a new story together. The days following the revelation were difficult for Alexander. He had accepted the truth, but acceptance hadn't eased the pain nor resolved the inner conflict that consumed him. On the outside, he tried to carry on with his life as usual, maintaining control over his business and projecting the image of the confident, successful man everyone knew. However, inside, he felt as though he was losing his balance. Everything he had believed about his past, his identity, and his family was teetering, leaving him in a state of profound crisis. At night, Alexander would find himself alone with his thoughts, staring at his mother's bracelet, the one that was now a kind of anchor for him, but also a constant source of questions. How could he continue loving Andrea, knowing she had hidden such a fundamental truth about his origin? Though his heart was still full of gratitude for her, there was also a mixture of anger and betrayal. Andrea had been his mother, his role model, the person who had taught him to fight and become who he was. But now, that image was tainted by the secrets she had chosen to keep. Tara, who was also trying to process the truth, had been a great support to him. Though she was grappling with the complexity of having discovered that Alexander was her brother, she seemed to have an inner peace that Alexander deeply envied. Tara accepted the story of their mothers with compassion, and in her company, Alexander found small moments of comfort. But even in those moments, the pain and confusion would return when he was alone. One night, unable to endure the storm of emotions, Alexander decided to go to Andrea's office, the one he had left untouched since her death. The place still carried the essence of his mother, the meticulously organized accounting books, her family photos, and a small keepsake box she had always kept. Alexander turned on a lamp and sat at the desk, looking at the objects his mother had valued, which had in some way borne witness to her life and secrets. He opened the keepsake box, and among the photos and letters, he found an old notebook, its pages filled with notes Andrea had written at different times in her life. Alexander began flipping through the notebook, and as he read, it felt as though he were hearing his mother's voice. These were the words of a woman who had loved deeply, but who had also faced a life of sacrifice and painful decisions. On one of the pages, he found a note that seemed to have been written for him, though it had never been delivered. Alexander, if you ever read this, I want you to know that everything I've done has been for love. There are things you may never fully understand, but I always knew it was my responsibility to give you a better life, one that Carol couldn't offer you. I did it because I love you more than words can express. Carol loved you too, and she will always be in your life, in a way that maybe only you can discover. I ask that you forgive me one day if you feel I failed you. I know you'll hate me for my decisions, but I hope you find peace and understand the love we always had for you. Tears began to roll down Alexander's face. Those words, so sincere and filled with pain, resonated deeply in his heart. Andrea had been aware of the burden of her decision, and though he still felt the weight of the betrayal, he also perceived the complexity of her sacrifice. That note showed him a mother who had carried a secret, not out of malice, but out of love. However, the note also unleashed a contained anger in Alexander. Why hadn't Andrea and Carol given him the chance to know the truth? Why had they deprived him of a relationship with his real mother and sister? Though he tried to understand, the pain and resentment still lingered. Days later, Alexander began showing signs of his crisis at work. His employees and colleagues noticed that the confident, decisive man was now scattered and less focused. Some important decisions began to be postponed, and his business partners started to worry. Despite his efforts to appear normal, Alexander was on the verge of losing control of his life. One night, after another difficult day at the office, Tara called him. Sensing his distress, she asked him to meet. Alexander agreed, and when he arrived at the place they had agreed upon, he found Tara waiting in a small cafe, her gaze reflecting an empathy that only someone in his situation could understand. Alexander, I know this is all very difficult for you. It's been hard for me too, but I think we've been given a chance. A chance to learn the story of our mothers and to understand that, though they made mistakes, they did so out of love, Tara said, her voice calm and full of compassion. Alexander sighed, unable to contain his frustration. It's just, I feel like everything I thought I knew has turned into a lie. All my sense of identity, my love and admiration for Andrea. Now they're clouded by anger and resentment. How can I move on, knowing she hid the truth from me my whole life? Tara squeezed his hand gently. Alexander, you're not alone. You don't have to carry this pain by yourself. Even though we didn't have the chance to grow up together, we're here now, and I believe we can find a way to heal together. Our mothers made difficult decisions, and I know it hurts, but I also believe they loved us in a way that maybe only now, after everything we've discovered, we can fully understand. Tara's words, though filled with truth, didn't entirely alleviate the emotional weight Alexander carried. Still, her presence helped him feel less alone in his inner struggle. For the first time, Alexander began to consider that maybe peace wouldn't come immediately, but with time, and with his sister's support. Thank you, Tara. I don't know how I would be handling all this without your support. Maybe we can find a way to honor their sacrifice, even though it's so hard for me to understand it, Alexander said, letting out a faint sigh. Tara smiled, her look conveying understanding and hope. I think finding a way to honor them is exactly what they would have wanted, Alexander. Maybe we can uncover more about their story, remember what they went through, and search in that for the path to healing. The idea of delving deeper into Andrea and Carol's past began to take root in Alexander's mind. Perhaps learning more about their lives, their struggles, and their sacrifices would give him the perspective he needed to comprehend the depth of their love and the weight of their decisions. That night, as he returned home, Alexander felt a little calmer. He still carried a mix of sadness, anger, and love, but now he also had a new sense of purpose. He realized that, to reconcile with his past and heal his identity, he needed to continue discovering the story of Andrea and Carol, not just as his mother and aunt, but as two women who did the best they could in difficult times. With this renewed determination, Alexander began planning his next steps in the investigation. He knew the road would be long and possibly painful, but he also understood that each step would bring him closer to a truth that might offer him the peace he longed for. And this time, he wouldn't face it alone. He had Tara, his sister, with whom he could share the burden and, together, begin to heal the wounds of the past. The identity crisis that had shaken Alexander was now transforming into a quest for understanding and reconciliation. He knew the process would be difficult, but he was willing to face it, step by step, with the hope that, in the end, he could once again love Andrea and Carol without the weight of betrayal, and find in their stories the true meaning of who he really was. After weeks immersed in a mix of pain and confusion, Alexander knew the time had come for a deeper conversation with Tara. Their previous encounters had been brief and full of unresolved emotions, but now he felt the need for both of them to share their thoughts, their wounds, and their mutual need to understand and heal. Without hesitation, he called her and asked her to meet at his house, a place where they could talk peacefully and uninterrupted. That night, Alexander prepared everything to make her feel comfortable. He knew that, like him, Tara carried the same mix of sadness and longing for answers. When Tara arrived, she greeted him with a faint smile, but he could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Alexander led her into the living room, where they both settled into the couches, unsure of how to begin. For a moment, silence filled the room, but finally, Alexander gathered his courage to speak, breaking the barrier of unspoken words. Tara, I don't know how to say this without sounding selfish, but I feel like my life has crumbled. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about Andrea, has changed in a way that I can't understand. I feel like I've lost my footing, like I've lost trust in the love I had for her. Tara looked at him with empathy, her own voice cracking with emotion when she responded. I understand you, Alexander. For me too, it's been a blow to discover the truth. My biological mother, Carol, is someone I barely remember, and now it turns out that Andrea, your mother, was actually my aunt, and you, who I always thought of as a stranger, are my brother. This changes everything, but I believe that, despite the confusion and the pain, the only thing we have now is the truth, and with that, we have to try to build something new. Tara took a sip of tea and breathed deeply before continuing. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed by what our mothers decided for us. Carol gave us up for adoption, separating us, and Andrea kept the secret of our lives. But I think we need to see their decisions from another angle. It wasn't a betrayal, even though it hurts. I believe both of them acted thinking of our well-being, even though it left us with many wounds. Alexander nodded, his eyes reflecting the understanding her words brought him. He remembered how his mother had dedicated every moment of her life to providing stability and love, and he realized that, although the secret was hard to accept, it was also an act of love. His resentment began to transform into a mix of compassion and understanding. I know, Tara. A part of me understands that. But it's so hard to let go of the anger, he admitted, his voice trembling. I feel like I now have a family, and at the same time, I've lost the mother I thought I knew. Andrea was everything to me, and now I also feel like Carol was someone I should have known, someone I should have loved. Tara leaned forward, her look gentle and understanding. Alexander, I think we still have to learn to reconcile those feelings. We don't need to erase Andrea's story or Carol's. Both were our mothers, in different ways. Both loved us, and I believe it's possible to honor that love, even though their decisions were hard to understand. The tone of her words, so full of peace, gave Alexander some comfort. He was beginning to see that, instead of clinging to the pain, maybe he could find a way to heal through his connection with Tara. The two of them, despite the separation and lost time, were here now, and together they could rebuild what had been taken from them. Tara took Alexander's hand, a gesture of support that he deeply appreciated. We didn't have the chance to grow up together as siblings, but now that we've found each other, we can learn to be siblings. We can support each other, rebuild what was lost, and give new meaning to all of this. Alexander nodded, feeling that, for the first time in a long time, he was beginning to let go of part of the burden he had been carrying. In the end, his mother's love, though filled with secrets, had led him to Tara, and that was something he was beginning to value in a different way. Determined to continue this process of healing, Alexander looked at Tara and proposed something he had been considering for some time. Tara, would you like us to try to discover more about our mother's story? I think understanding their lives and decisions could help us better comprehend the sacrifice they made and heal. Maybe there's something that can help us close the wounds and accept all of this with more peace. Tara looked at him with a mixture of emotion and relief. I'd love to, Alexander. I think it's the right thing to do. Carol and Andrea deserve to be remembered not only for the sacrifice, but for the life they lived and the love they shared. This story isn't just a secret. It's a testament to two women who, in their own way, did what they thought was best for us. They both shared a smile filled with promises of a new beginning. Alexander felt, for the first time in a long time, that there was a way to make sense of all the pain and confusion. He and Tara had been separated by circumstances beyond their control, but now they had the opportunity to rebuild their relationship as siblings and honor the sacrifice of their mothers. Throughout the night, Alexander and Tara began sharing memories of their childhoods, their lives before discovering the truth, and their favorite moments with their mothers. Each story, each memory, brought them closer, making them understand that, though their paths had been different, they both shared the same origin and a love that could now blossom without barriers. That night, as Alexander said goodbye to Tara at the door, he felt that something in his life was beginning to heal. He knew the road would be long and that the pain wouldn't disappear immediately, but with Tara by his side, the process felt more bearable. The connection between them wasn't just based on blood, but on the understanding and compassion they now shared. When Tara left, Alexander returned to the living room and picked up his mother's bracelet, contemplating it under the soft light of the lamp. This object, which had once seemed like nothing more than a symbol of pain and betrayal, he now saw as a symbol of love and sacrifice, a reminder of the complexity of human decisions and the strength that both mothers had shown in choosing the difficult path. With a deep breath of determination, Alexander silently made a promise. He would honor the memory of Carol and Andrea, not from anger, but from gratitude and love. And alongside Tara, he would discover the full story, remembering that, in the end, both mothers had united them, even through distance and silence. That night, Alexander slept more peacefully than he had in weeks, knowing he had taken a step toward reconciliation with himself and his past. The days after his deep conversation with Tara were a bit quieter for Alexander. The clarity he had found alongside his sister gave him a new perspective, and while the wounds still hurt, the promise to rebuild their relationship filled him with renewed purpose. However, just as he was starting to find some peace, an unexpected storm loomed over them. One afternoon, while reviewing some documents in his office, Alexander received a call from an old friend, Thomas, who worked in media. His voice sounded urgent and somewhat worried. "Alexander, I don't know how to tell you this, but I've heard rumors that a journalist is investigating your family history. It seems he's been gathering information and plans to publish something big related to your mother, Carol, and the secrets you've just uncovered." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. How was it possible that someone else knew the truth of his origin? They had barely shared this information with a few close people, and he himself hadn't even finished processing everything he had discovered. The idea that someone wanted to expose that part of his life filled him with rage and worry, not only for him, but also for Tara, who was just beginning to accept her own story. "Do you know who the journalist is?" Alexander asked, trying to remain calm. "Yes, his name is Frank Sanchez. He's a journalist who specializes in high-impact stories, often related to public figures. He's known for stopping at nothing to get an exclusive. Alexander, if this man is behind your story, he could be a real threat," Thomas replied, his tone serious. Alexander felt a mix of frustration and helplessness. It wasn't just his life at stake, but also the reputation of his mother, Andrea, and Carol's sacrifice. Both had made difficult decisions, and exposing those secrets in the press wouldn't just be a betrayal of their memories, but also a devastating blow to him and Tara. Determined to protect their story and prevent Frank from causing harm, Alexander contacted his legal team and explained the situation. He asked them to prepare all possible legal measures to prevent the publication of any article that could tarnish his mother's image or invade their privacy. However, he knew that facing a journalist like Frank wouldn't be easy. The story of their mothers, with all its sacrifices and secrets, was exactly the kind of story someone like him would exploit without hesitation. That same night, Alexander met with Tara at his house. She greeted him with a mixture of concern and exhaustion. Clearly, she had also heard about Frank's plans. "Alexander, this is affecting me more than I imagined. I never thought something so personal could become a public spectacle. My life has been quiet until now, and the thought that someone wants to expose what our mothers did for us scares me." Alexander looked at her with shared sadness, fully understanding her fear. "I know, Tara. I feel the same frustration, but I promise you, I won't let Frank destroy the sacrifice our mothers made. They deserve respect, and I won't allow anyone to trivialize their story for a sensationalistic article." Tara nodded, grateful for her brother's support. However, her voice reflected an unexpected resolve. "Alexander, I've been thinking about this all day, and I think we need to face it differently. We could hide and fight to keep it a secret, or we could take control of our story and tell it ourselves." Alexander looked at her surprised. The idea of exposing themselves voluntarily was something he had never considered. His entire life had been extremely private, especially about personal matters. But as he looked into Tara's determined eyes, he realized this might be an opportunity to free themselves from fear and transform their story into something positive. "Are you saying we should tell our story to the world?" Alexander asked, trying to understand the magnitude of her proposal. Tara nodded, a slight smile on her face. "Yes. If we tell our story with sincerity and respect, we can not only protect our mother's memory, but also inspire others who might have gone through similar situations. It doesn't have to be a story of scandal, but one of love, sacrifice, and redemption. Something that honors what Carol and Andrea did for us." Alexander reflected in silence. Though the idea terrified him, he could also see the power that telling their truth without fear or manipulation would have in their lives. They would be the narrators of their story, and that narrative would belong to them, not a sensationalist journalist seeking to profit from their pain. Finally, with a deep sigh, Alexander agreed. "You're right, Tara. It's our story, and it's time we tell it our way. If this is what's needed to protect our mothers and free us from the secrets, then I'm willing to do it with you." Tara smiled, and they shared a moment of sincere connection. Alexander felt that, though the road would be tough, he had the support of his sister to face it. They decided to organize a press conference for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Alexander and Tara carefully prepared, drafting every word they wanted to share, ensuring their message reflected the essence of their mothers and the complexity of the story they had discovered. Finally, the day of the press conference arrived. The atmosphere in the press room was filled with anticipation. Journalists from various media outlets had attended, alerted by Alexander's unusual decision to hold a public conference about his family life. However, none were prepared for the story Alexander and Tara were about to tell. Alexander took the microphone first, his hand steady, but his voice full of emotion. He looked at the audience, and after a brief pause, began to speak. "Thank you for being here. Today we are here to share something that has deeply marked our lives, something we recently discovered that has completely transformed our perception of our family history." With serenity and clarity, Alexander recounted the story of Andrea and Carol, two sisters who, during a time of hardship and sacrifice, made decisions that would define their children's destinies. He spoke of Andrea's unconditional love, her dedication, and how she took on the responsibility of raising him as her own to give him a better life. Then, he handed the microphone to Tara. "My biological mother, Carol, made a similar sacrifice when she placed me for adoption, trusting that I would have a safe and loving life," Tara said, her voice trembling but full of gratitude. Carol and Andrea were not perfect, and their decisions were not easy, but they acted out of love and sacrifice. Alexander and I are here today to honor them and to ensure that their story is known from truth and respect. The audience was in absolute silence. Alexander and Tara shared their story without grudges, without hiding the pain, but also with deep respect for the women who had loved them from the shadows. The sincerity of their words and the transparency with which they told their story moved those present, and many journalists who had arrived hoping for a scandal found instead a story of love and sacrifice that transcended generations. At the end, Alexander and Tara received questions from the press, but most were respectful and thoughtful, thanking them for their bravery and expressing admiration for their decision to share such a personal truth. Alexander felt a great sense of liberation, as if by telling their story, part of the burden he had carried was dissipating. Frank, the journalist who had tried to exploit their story, attempted to ask some provocative questions, insinuating distorted versions of the story, but Alexander and Tara's sincerity served as a shield. Their authentic and transparent narrative left little room for manipulation, and Frank's attempts soon faded in the tide of respect and empathy their testimony generated. That night, as Alexander and Tara returned home together, both felt a renewed peace. They had faced their truth with courage, and in doing so, not only protected the memory of their mothers, but also freed themselves from the fears and secrets that had tormented them. They had transformed their story into a legacy of love and strength, one that, far from being a scandal, would be remembered as proof of the power of sacrifice and family. In the following days, Alexander and Tara began receiving messages from people who felt inspired by their story, from families facing similar secrets who now found hope in their bravery. Alexander then understood that by telling their story, he hadn't just protected his past, but also created a future filled with peace, meaning, and above all, truth. The morning after the press conference, Alexander and Tara woke up to an avalanche of messages and reactions from people moved by their story, expressing support and respect. Despite the public exposure, they both felt a sense of peace and liberation. They had transformed a painful secret into a story of love and sacrifice, and in doing so, they had managed to protect the memory of Andrea and Carol, while simultaneously freeing themselves from the weight of so many years of concealment. Throughout the day, Alexander and Tara went through each message they received, some from close friends and family, others from strangers who felt inspired by their bravery. Some shared their own stories of family secrets and sacrifices, thanking them for giving them hope and the courage to face their own truths. Alexander then realized that their story, though unique, resonated with many people and, in some way, had become a symbol of redemption and acceptance. However, although most of the press reacted with empathy, some sensationalist journalists tried to reinterpret the story, launching insinuations and distorting details to create controversy. Among them was Frank, who wouldn't give up so easily. Determined to exploit any hint of conflict, he published an article questioning Alexander and Tara's motives for sharing their story, insinuating that they had done so for publicity and to redirect attention to their business and charitable activities. The article suggested that the family story was a media strategy and that there were inconsistencies in their account. When Alexander read the article, he felt a mix of anger and frustration. He had laid his heart and truth on the table, and yet someone was trying to manipulate it for their own gain. This time, however, anger didn't overtake him. He remembered Tara's words at the conference and how their sincerity had disarmed Frank's insinuations. He knew responding directly to the journalist would only fuel the fire, so he decided to let the truth speak for itself. However, part of him was still concerned, especially about the effect this would have on Tara. That afternoon, Alexander went to visit his sister. When he arrived at her house, he found Tara in the small living room, reading messages of support from people who had been touched by their story. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but Alexander noticed a slight shadow of concern on her face. "Did you see it?" Alexander asked, referring to Frank's article. Tara nodded, placing the phone on the table. "Yes, I saw it. At first it bothered me because I feel like someone is trying to turn something so intimate into a tool for conflict. But then, I remembered something a friend told me a long time ago. The truth, when it's sincere, is stronger than any lie. We told our story with love and respect. If some can't see that, then we don't have to defend ourselves from their attacks." Alexander smiled, admiring his sister's calmness. It was a lesson he was still trying to learn, but seeing Tara's peace gave him hope that one day he too could feel that way. "You're right, Tara. We know what we did and why we did it. We can't control what others think, but we can decide how we respond to it." Tara looked at him with a warm smile and nodded. "Also, Alexander, I think there's something we can do to make sure our story is remembered for what it truly represents. We've turned a burden into a message of love and hope, and I think that can reach many more if we decide to do something more lasting, something that keeps alive the memory of Andrea and Carol and the sacrifice they made." Alexander looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Tara leaned toward him, her face filled with emotion and enthusiasm. "I've been thinking about the possibility of starting an organization in honor of our mothers, something that helps people in vulnerable situations. like mothers who face tough decisions, and children who, like us, were separated from their roots by life's circumstances. We could offer support, guidance, and resources for families going through difficult times. Imagine, Alexander, we could turn our pain and experiences into something positive for others. Alexander reflected on the idea. He knew Tara was right. Creating a foundation would be a powerful way to give purpose to their mother's story and channel their pain into something positive. It was, moreover, an opportunity to heal and rebuild together. Tara, that's brilliant. I think it's exactly what we need. We could help others while also honoring Andrea and Carol's legacy. They sacrificed so much for us. I think this would be a way to give back some of what they gave us. They spent the next few hours outlining ideas for the foundation, discussing possible programs and services they could offer, from legal advice and emotional support to educational programs and art workshops for children. Alexander decided that he would take charge of the management and financing of the organization, leveraging his business experience, while Tara, with her talent for art and education, would design the support programs and creative expression for both the children and the mothers. In the weeks that followed, Alexander and Tara worked intensively on the project. They sought out people who shared their ideals and gathered a small team of professionals committed to the organization's mission. As they made progress with the plans, Alexander felt a sense of inner peace beginning to grow within him. He had found a purpose beyond business and his former life. Now, he had a mission that connected him to his history and the sacrifice of his mothers. Finally, the day of the foundation's opening arrived. Alexander and Tara organized a presentation event at a community center, inviting friends, family, and some members of the press. The excitement in the air was palpable. Both knew that this was a momentous occasion in their lives. Before the event began, Alexander took his sister's hand and smiled at her, feeling that they were finally closing one chapter and opening another. When it was his turn to speak, Alexander addressed the audience with the same respect and love they had shown during the press conference. Today, we are here to inaugurate an organization that honors the memory of two women who profoundly marked our lives. Andrea and Carol, our mothers. Both made difficult and painful decisions to give us a better life. And though those decisions separated us for a long time, now we understand that they did it out of love and sacrifice. This foundation is a way to give back something of what they gave us by helping others facing complicated circumstances. Alexander paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. Our story is not unique. Many families face difficult situations, secrets that separate them, decisions that affect them for generations. We want this foundation to be a place where those people can find support, understanding, and, above all, the hope that they can overcome those challenges and create something positive from them. Tara also took the microphone, emotional. We want this organization to be a refuge for those who feel alone, for those who need help and guidance. Andrea and Carol taught us with their lives that true love involves sacrifice, and today we are here to honor that lesson by helping others find peace in their own stories. The audience burst into applause, and Alexander felt a wave of gratitude and satisfaction. As he looked around at the people present, he realized that at last he had found a purpose that gave meaning to everything he had been through. In the following months, the foundation began to gain recognition within the community. Alexander and Tara worked tirelessly to expand the programs and reach more people, helping mothers, children, and families overcome difficult situations and find support in their darkest times. The long nights and constant effort became a silent tribute to Andrea and Carol, two women whose story now lived in every person who came to them seeking help. The organization also became a source of healing for Alexander and Tara. They both learned to work together, supporting each other and discovering new facets of their sibling relationship that they had never had the chance to explore. Alexander found in Tara a strength and generosity that inspired him, and Tara discovered in Alexander a determination and loyalty that she admired deeply. Through their work, both began to heal the wounds of the past, transforming pain into compassion and sacrifice into a legacy of hope. One afternoon, while reviewing foundation reports in the office, Alexander paused to observe the bracelet on his wrist. It was Andrea's bracelet, the same one that had once symbolized pain and betrayal, but now represented the love, connection, and sacrifice of their mothers. He looked at Tara, who also wore Carol's bracelet, and they both smiled, sharing a moment of peace and gratitude. "You know, Alexander, I think they'd be proud of what we've accomplished," Tara said with a calm smile. Alexander nodded, feeling a warmth fill his heart. "I'm sure they are. All of this is for them, for the sacrifice they made for us. And I think, in every person we help, in every family that finds comfort, we are continuing their legacy." That day, Alexander understood that, though the scars of his past would never disappear completely, he had learned to live with them in a way that made him stronger, more compassionate, and more at peace with himself. The love of Andrea and Carol was now a living part of his life, and the life of those who came to them seeking support. Alexander and Tara's journey was still filled with challenges, but now they knew they weren't alone. United by the legacy of their mothers and the love they had found in their own relationship, they continued moving forward, carrying with them the greatest lesson Andrea and Carol had left them, that true love, even when it involves sacrifice, always finds its way to the light. The foundation that Alexander and Tara had created in honor of Andrea and Carol had started to make a real impact in the community. Through the support programs and the stories of love and sacrifice they shared, many people found inspiration and comfort, which helped the organization grow and reach more families. However, as the foundation gained recognition, a new opportunity arose that both knew would be challenging but deeply meaningful: to share their story on a public and far-reaching platform. Weeks after the foundation's opening, Alexander and Tara received an unexpected invitation. The renowned television host, Marta Rivera, wanted to interview them on her show, one of the highest-rated programs in the country. Marta, known for her empathetic and deep style, had heard about the story behind the foundation and the bravery of Alexander and Tara in sharing it. She proposed an interview so they could tell their story on their own terms, without the filter of sensationalist press or the distortions that had tried to discredit them. The proposal was tempting, but also terrifying. Alexander and Tara knew that sharing their story on national television meant exposing themselves on a level they had never imagined. However, after days of reflection, they both agreed that the opportunity to deliver an authentic message of hope and healing was more important than the fear of exposure. Moreover, they knew that this interview would allow them to connect with thousands of people who might need to hear a story of love and reconciliation. Finally, they accepted the invitation. In the days leading up to the interview, they carefully prepared, discussing together how they wanted to frame their message and recalling the sacrifices of their mothers. They knew the key was to speak from the heart and to be as sincere as possible, trusting that the truth would find its way on its own. On the afternoon of the interview, Alexander and Tara arrived at the television studio. Marta welcomed them with a warmth that helped calm their initial nerves. Her friendliness and genuine interest in hearing their story gave them confidence, and as they settled in on set, Alexander and Tara looked at each other and held hands, reaffirming their decision to face their truth with courage. When the cameras started rolling, Marta gave an emotional and respectful introduction, explaining how Alexander and Tara's story had touched her heart. Then she turned to them and, with an encouraging smile, gave them the floor. "Alexander, Tara, thank you for being here today. I know it hasn't been easy to get to this point, and I'd like you to start by telling us how this journey began. When did you start discovering this story that has undoubtedly changed your lives?" Alexander took the microphone first, his voice serene but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Marta. Yes, it has been a difficult journey, but also very revealing. It all started after Andrea's death, my mother, who was an incredible woman who raised me with love and dedication. After her passing, I discovered details about my origins that I never imagined. I found out that my biological mother was, in fact, Carol, Andrea's sister. It was news that deeply shocked me, because though I thought I knew my story, it turns out there were parts of it that had been kept secret to protect me. Marta listened attentively, her face reflecting understanding. It must have been a very hard moment for you, Alexander. How did you feel when you discovered that Andrea wasn't your biological mother, and that Carol, whom you barely knew, had such an important role in your life? Alexander took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. It was devastating, to be honest. I felt a mix of betrayal and confusion. Everything I thought was my identity, my history, was crumbling. But then I understood that Andrea and Carol's silence wasn't a betrayal. It was, in fact, a sacrifice filled with love. Andrea decided to raise me as her son, and that was an act of unconditional love. And even though Carol couldn't be present in my life, she too loved me deeply. It was a difficult process, but in the end, I was able to accept that both acted from the heart. Marta nodded, her gaze warm and encouraging. It's a story full of complexity, and I'm glad you found meaning in all of it, Alexander. Now, Tara, how was it for you to discover this truth and find your brother in the middle of all this? Tara smiled, looking at Alexander before answering. At first, it was a huge shock. I grew up not knowing Carol, my biological mother, because I was adopted as a baby. And when I discovered that Alexander was my biological brother, it was as if my whole life took an unexpected turn. But at the same time, I felt that this encounter was an opportunity to reconcile with my history, to accept what Carol did for me, and to get to know Alexander as my family, even if it was after so many years. This process has been healing, and although it hurts what our mothers went through, I also feel gratitude for the love they left us. Marta, visibly moved, continued with the interview, exploring every corner of the sacrifice and healing story of the two siblings. What you've shared is truly inspiring, and I imagine that this foundation, created in honor of your mothers, is an extension of that love. Could you tell us more about how this idea came about and what you hope to achieve with it? Alexander and Tara exchanged a smile before Alexander took the microphone. The foundation was born from a need to give purpose to our story. We felt that what our mothers did for us was something that deserved to be remembered in a way that helps others. We know that many families face similar difficulties, that many children and mothers live situations of separation, adoption, and difficult decisions, and we wanted this organization to be a place where those people could find support and understanding. Tara added, her voice soft but filled with determination. We want the foundation to be a refuge, a space where people can feel they're not alone. We also have art and expression programs for the children, because I've personally seen the power of art as a healing tool. We want everyone who comes to us to find peace and the hope that they can overcome their own challenges, just as we are trying to overcome ours. The audience was silent, absorbed in the sincerity and strength of their words. Marta was also moved, and after a pause, she looked at them with a mixture of respect and admiration. Alexander, Tara, I'd like to ask something personal. After everything you've discovered and the story you've shared today, how do you feel now, looking toward the future? How do you see the relationship between you and the legacy you're building? Alexander and Tara looked at each other, both understanding the depth of the question. Alexander was the first to answer, his voice reflecting a calmness that had taken him a long time to reach. Today, I can say that I feel at peace. It's been a long process, full of pain, but also love. And knowing that I have Tara as my sister, as my partner in this mission, is something that fills me with gratitude. I know our mothers, Andrea and Carol, did everything they could to give us a better life, and although their decisions separated us in the beginning, now I feel they've united us in a way I never imagined." Tara smiled, her eyes filled with emotional tears. "I also feel grateful. Alexander has been a pillar in this process, and together we're building something beautiful. I feel that this foundation, this mission, is our tribute to our mothers. They sacrificed so much, and now we want that sacrifice to become something positive for others. Our bond has grown, and every day that passes, I feel that the pain turns into strength." The interview ended with applause from the audience, and Marta bid them farewell with words of affection and respect. Alexander and Tara left the set with the feeling that they had taken a decisive step toward healing. They knew that sharing their story in such a public space had been an act of bravery, but also of liberation. They had told their truth, without filters or distortions, and now they could move forward with the certainty that the story of their mothers and their sacrifice had been honored. In the days that followed, the interview had a huge impact on the audience, and many people approached the foundation seeking support, sharing their own stories of sacrifice, adoption, and reconciliation. Alexander and Tara realized that their story had not only freed them, but also touched the lives of people who needed to find a purpose and healing similar to their own experiences. At the end of an intense week of work at the foundation, Alexander and Tara met in the small office they shared. They were both exhausted, but at peace, knowing that every effort had been worth it. "Do you realize what we've achieved?" Alexander asked, looking at his sister with a satisfied smile. "We've taken something that was a burden and turned it into a mission." Tara nodded, taking Alexander's hand. "And we've done it together. Andrea and Carol would be proud of us, Alexander. They brought us together, and now their love lives in everything we do here." That night, as they turned off the office lights and left the building, Alexander and Tara walked together in silence under the stars. They knew they still had a long way to go, but now they were certain they could face any challenge. They had found their truth, and with it, a purpose that would guide them toward a future full of peace and hope, leaving a legacy of love and strength in the hearts of all those who sought comfort and healing in their foundation. With the impact of the television interview, Alexander and Tara noticed how the foundation began to receive more attention and support from people who felt inspired by their story. The organization was growing, and each day, both siblings felt more connected to the legacy of their mothers. However, even though they felt they had made progress in the healing process, there was still something that remained a mystery: the full story of Andrea and Carol, their mothers. Aware that there were still pieces of the past left undiscovered, Alexander and Tara decided it was time to dig deeper into their mothers' lives and better understand their decisions. One afternoon, while reviewing foundation files, Alexander mentioned his idea to Tara. "I think we need to know more, Tara. Everything we've done so far has been beautiful and meaningful, but I feel like we still don't know everything about them. There are details of their lives that could give us more clarity and maybe even more peace." Tara nodded, her expression one of understanding. "You're right. I feel like we still need to fully understand them, to know what they went through, the difficult decisions they faced, that could give us a more complete perspective on what their sacrifice really meant for us." Alexander suggested that they visit the town where Andrea and Carol had grown up. They knew that there they could find people who had known them, maybe friends or relatives who still remembered their story and could offer insight into the early years of their mothers. The idea filled them with emotion and nostalgia, as they knew this trip would be another step toward full reconciliation with the past. Determined to move forward, Alexander and Tara made arrangements for the trip. It was a small rural town, far from the big city, where their mothers had spent their childhood and adolescence. Both knew the place held deep meaning for Andrea and Carol, as it was where their first memories were made, and also the stage for the difficulties they had faced together. When they arrived in the town, Alexander and Tara were greeted by an atmosphere of quiet and simplicity. The place was cozy, filled with small houses with faded, colorful facades and cobblestone streets that seemed unchanged for decades. They felt as though they were walking in the same steps their mothers had walked years ago, and that filled them with a mix of melancholy and curiosity. The first stop was at the civil registry, where they hoped to find information about Andrea and Carol's family background. The clerk, an older woman with round glasses and a kind gaze, was very willing to help them. After a brief search through the files, she found the birth certificates of both sisters and some documents related to their family. "Here are the records for Andrea and Carol Cortez," said the woman, handing them the certificates. According to these documents, both were born in this town and spent their early years here. They were known as the daughters of the Cortez family, a very respected family, but one that faced many difficulties in their time. Alexander and Tara looked at the certificates with reverence, feeling an intimate connection to their mothers' lives. Although it was nothing more than paper and ink, those documents contained the story of two women who, from their birth, had to face obstacles that the siblings were just beginning to understand. The registry clerk, who seemed to remember something else, looked at them curiously. "Are you interested in knowing more about the Cortez sisters? I know someone who could help you. Her name is Lucy. She was very close friends with Andrea and Carol and lived through many things with them. I think she still lives here, in a small house near the church." Alexander and Tara thanked her for the information and headed to Lucy's house, a woman who, according to the clerk, was almost the same age as their mothers. Upon arrival, they found a small brick house with a flower-filled garden. They knocked on the door, and a grey-haired woman with a kind face greeted them. She seemed surprised to see them, but when Alexander and Tara explained who they were, her expression immediately changed to one of warmth and nostalgia. "Are you the children of Andrea and Carol? Oh, how they loved them. Come in, come in. We have so much to talk about," Lucy said, inviting them inside and leading them to a room decorated with antique furniture and black and white photographs. Lucy, seeing their expressions of interest, began speaking with a mix of emotion and melancholy. "Your mothers were inseparable, you know. Since childhood, they faced everything together. But life wasn't easy for them. Their family was poor, and from a very young age, they had to work hard. Carol, in particular, was a dreamer, always talking about leaving the town, about seeking something beyond. But circumstances didn't always allow those dreams to come true." Tara listened intently to every word, her eyes filled with deep sadness. Knowing that her mother had had dreams and aspirations that she couldn't fulfill moved her in a way she hadn't expected. Alexander, for his part, felt a mix of pride and compassion. Though he had never known Carol in this way, he could imagine her strong and passionate character, something he had undoubtedly inherited. Lucy continued, her eyes shining with distant memories. "When Carol got pregnant with you, Alexander, it was a scandal in the town. She was young and unmarried, and that was very difficult for the family. Carol wanted to keep you, but she knew she couldn't give you the life you deserved. That's when Andrea, your mother, offered to raise you as her own. Andrea was always the stronger of the two, the more practical one. She wanted the best for you, and knew Carol couldn't offer you stability at that time." Alexander felt a lump form in his throat as he heard those words. Andrea had taken on the responsibility of raising him, not only out of love, but to protect Carol and give her a chance to start over. The depth of that sacrifice and the compassion behind it moved him in a way he hadn't anticipated. "And what happened afterward?" asked Tara, eager to learn more about their mother's story. Lucy sighed and continued. "Carol tried to move on, but she always carried you in her heart. And when she had Tara, the situation hadn't improved. Andrea was already in the city with you, and this time, Carol was completely alone. She decided to put Tara up for adoption so she could have a better life too. It was a decision that broke her, but Carol was always very brave. She believed that someday fate would reunite them all, that their children would meet and understand their sacrifice." Tara looked at Lucy with tears in her eyes. For the first time, she understood the pain Carol must have felt when making that decision. Everything she had done was out of love, and although her absence had left a wound, Tara now understood that her mother had loved her enough to let go of her for her own well-being. Noticing his sister's emotion, Alexander took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze, reminding her that they were in this healing process together. "Lucy, do you know if our mothers ever had a way of staying connected?" asked Alexander, remembering the identical bracelets both he and Tara wore. Lucy smiled and pointed to the bracelets on their wrists. Those bracelets were a gift that Carol and Andrea gave each other when they were young. They reminded them of their bond and their promise to always be together, no matter what happened. When Carol knew she wouldn't be able to stay with you, she left her bracelet with Tara, and Andrea did the same with you, Alexander. It was their way of ensuring that no matter what, the love between them and for you would endure. Alexander and Tara looked at their bracelets, feeling a new weight of meaning. That small object was more than a memory. It was a promise of eternal love, a tie that neither time nor distance had been able to break. Before they left, Lucy showed them a box filled with letters that Carol had written to Andrea over the years. Although the letters were few and brief, each word was filled with nostalgia and sisterly love. Carol shared her thoughts with Andrea, her pain over not being able to see her children, and her hope that one day they would be reunited. When they left Lucy's house, Alexander and Tara felt overwhelmed by the intensity of the memories and sacrifices of their mothers. That trip had allowed them to know Carol and Andrea in a more complete way, discovering their dreams, their fears, and above all, the depth of their love. That night, back at the small hotel where they were staying, Alexander and Tara sat on the balcony, looking at the stars in silence. They felt that, instead of looking at the sky, they were looking into the past, toward the moments that Carol and Andrea had shared and the sacrifice they had made. "I think I finally understand, Alexander," said Tara, breaking the silence. "Carol and Andrea never abandoned us. They left us a life full of love, and even though we couldn't be with them, we were always in their hearts." Alexander nodded, feeling a peace he had never felt before. "You're right, Tara. Now that we know all this, I feel like I carry them with me in a different way. They lived, they dreamed, they loved, and they sacrificed everything for us. And now their legacy lives on in us, in the foundation, and in every step we take." That night, Alexander and Tara made a silent promise under the stars. They would honor the memory of Carol and Andrea, not only with the foundation, but also with their own lives, living with the same strength and courage that their mothers had left them as a legacy. They knew that, even though the journey of discovery had been painful, it had also transformed them. Now, more than ever, they were ready to face the future together, with the past rescued and the love of their mothers as an eternal guide. Despite the peace Alexander and Tara had found in the village and the clarity they had gained about their mother's history, the outside world wasn't ready to let them rest. As soon as they returned to the city, Alexander received an urgent notification from his legal team. Frank, the journalist who had previously tried to discredit them, was back, and this time he seemed determined to launch a public offensive. Frank had spent months gathering information and, according to the lawyers, was about to publish an article that not only questioned the sacrificial story of Carol and Andrea, but also cast doubt on the authenticity of the foundation. There were insinuations about the use of funds, accusations of media manipulation, and theories suggesting that Alexander and Tara were using their personal story to gain influence in the social and business realms. Alexander felt a surge of indignation and helplessness as he read the report. That same afternoon, Alexander met with Tara in the Foundation's office. They both read the lawyer's notes in silence, and as Frank's venomous words unfolded in the document, Alexander observed his sister. He knew this situation hurt her deeply, and seeing the shadow of concern on her face confirmed they had to face this threat together. "I can't believe Frank is willing to manipulate our story like this," Tara said, her voice tight. "After everything we've shared with the public, with truth and transparency, he still tries to destroy us." Alexander took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. I know this is difficult, Tara, but we've come so far. We're not going to let someone like Frank destroy the legacy of our mothers or what we've built. We need to protect the foundation and everyone who trusts us. Tara nodded, but her concern was evident. What are we going to do? We can't ignore it. If he publishes this story, it could damage the foundation's image, and it might even affect the families who come to us for support. It's not just about us. There are many people involved who would be hurt. Alexander knew his sister was right. The situation required a swift and careful response. They couldn't simply ignore Frank's threat. The foundation's integrity was at stake, and the reputation of their mothers, who had worked so hard to protect it, could be tarnished by the journalist's insinuations. After a lengthy discussion, Alexander and Tara decided that the best defense was total transparency. While they had already shared their story on television, they knew Frank's threats could be neutralized if they offered a new public statement and provided all the necessary documentation to prove the foundation's legitimacy. But this time, their statement would be much more detailed and meticulous. With the support of their legal team and communication advisors, they began working on a plan. They would organize a press conference to respond to Frank's accusations directly, opening the foundation's records and offering all information about its financing, expenses, and activities. By showing transparency, Alexander and Tara sought not only to defend their integrity, but also to show that they were committed to the truth and had nothing to hide. The week leading up to the press conference was intense. Both reviewed every document and transaction made by the foundation since its creation. They contacted several families that had received support, and many agreed to be present at the conference to offer their testimonies about the positive impact the organization had had on their lives. Alexander and Tara wanted the public to see the reality of the foundation and understand that their work was genuine, motivated only by the desire to honor their mothers and help others. The day of the conference arrived, and the hall was full of journalists, including some of Frank's colleagues. Alexander and Tara sat before the audience, accompanied by their legal team and a few foundation beneficiaries. Both felt tense, but the presence of the families they had helped gave them strength. They knew they were surrounded by people who believed in them and their mission. Alexander was the first to speak. His voice was firm and determined, full of the conviction he had acquired throughout his journey toward healing. Today, we are here to respond to a series of unfounded and malicious accusations that seek to discredit the work we've done in honor of our mothers, Andrea and Carol. As many of you know, this foundation was founded with the purpose of helping mothers and children in vulnerable situations, offering support and resources to those facing difficulties similar to what our mothers went through. We, like every family that has come here, have faced a difficult path, and our mission is authentic. Tara took the microphone, her voice firm and confident. We want all of you to know that this foundation is the result of a journey of love and reconciliation. Everything we've shared with you is the truth, and today we're here to back up every word with documentation and testimonies from those who have received support. Our commitment is to the truth, and that's why we're opening the Foundation's books so you can see the transparent and honest work we do every day. With the help of their legal team, Alexander and Tara presented documents detailing every financial aspect of the Foundation, from the donations received to the expenses on support programs. They offered statistics on the families they had assisted, the workshops held, and the achievements made. Everything was backed by reports and audits, demonstrating the integrity of their operations. After the presentation, some foundation beneficiaries took the stage to share their stories. Among them was Anna, a single mother who had found the emotional and legal support she needed to retain custody of her children. Lucas, a young man who had participated in art workshops, also spoke, thanking Tara for teaching him how to express his emotions through painting. The testimonies moved the audience and showed the human side of the foundation. The families spoke about how the support from Alexander and Tara had changed their lives, and their sincerity resonated in the room. Alexander looked at Tara as they listened to each story, and he felt deep gratitude for everything they had built together. Finally, the pivotal moment came when a journalist raised his hand and asked directly about Frank's motivations and the accusations he had made. Alexander took the microphone, determined to face the question with dignity. "We have been transparent and open with our story from the beginning. Frank has the right to question and investigate, but his approach has been unfair and filled with bias. He has accused us without evidence and insinuated things that have no foundation. This foundation is our way of honoring our mothers and helping others. We won't let someone distort that for their own benefit." The firmness of Alexander and Tara and the clarity with which they presented their defense left little room for doubt. The audience applauded their bravery, and the respect of those present was evident. Even some journalists who had been critical of them at the beginning now showed admiration. When the conference ended, Alexander and Tara felt a peace they hadn't experienced in a long time. They had faced the threat with transparency and dignity, and felt they had done justice not only to their own story, but also to the memory of their mothers. Although Frank would surely try to resume his attack, they knew they had made it clear that the truth was on their side. In the days that followed, the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Alexander and Tara's sincerity and the impact of the testimonies from the families demonstrated that the foundation was a genuine and committed organization. Many people, moved by the story and transparency of the siblings, began supporting the foundation even more, sending donations and volunteering. Alexander and Tara then understood that, although the path had been difficult, each challenge had made them stronger. Their story, though full of pain and sacrifice, had become a source of inspiration for others, and now, more than ever, they felt that the love of Andrea and Carol lived on in every person they helped. That day, sitting together in the foundation's office, Alexander looked at Tara with a grateful smile. "We've done the right thing. Our mothers would be proud of us." Tara returned the smile, her eyes full of peace. "Yes, they would. And every day we help someone new, they are still with us." Over time, Alexander and Tara learned that truth and transparency were their greatest allies. They knew there would always be people like Frank, willing to take advantage of others' pain, but they also knew that their mission was stronger than any obstacle. United, with the memory of their mothers as a guide, Alexander and Tara continued working at the foundation, confident that the love and sacrifice they had received would be the foundation of a lasting legacy. As the months went by, the foundation that Alexander and Tara had created in honor of their mothers, Andrea and Carol, flourished, becoming a pillar of support for families and people in vulnerable situations. Frank's threat became a thing of the past, fading before the strength of the truth and the transparency with which the siblings had responded. The foundation was now a refuge known for its warmth and the genuine commitment of its founders, and Alexander and Tara finally felt at peace, certain that they were honoring the sacrifice of their mothers. One day, as they reviewed reports from the foundation in their office, Tara turned to Alexander with a contemplative smile. "Have you realized everything we've achieved?" she asked, with a warm gaze full of gratitude. "Sometimes it's hard for me to believe that from all that pain, from all the revelations, we've created something so beautiful." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. They had come a long way together, and what had started as an open wound had transformed into a life mission. His eyes swept across the room of the foundation, the photographs of happy families on the walls, the children's artwork that had passed through. Each image and each memory was proof that the sacrifice of their mothers had not been in vain. "It's true, Tara. I think in some way our mothers guided us here. They left us the story, and love needed to build something good." Alexander sighed, his voice full of emotion. "This foundation is their legacy, and it's ours too. We're carrying forward their dreams, even the ones they themselves couldn't fulfill." The foundation had grown so much that it was beginning to expand into other cities. What started as a small project in honor of Andrea and Carol had become an invaluable resource for mothers and children in need of emotional, legal, and educational support. The activities and workshops organized by Tara, especially the art programs, had given young people a way to express themselves and heal, just as she had done when discovering her own story. Alexander, with his business experience, managed the resources and ensured that every donation was used effectively. That same day, they received an unexpected visit. It was Lucy, their mother's friend, who had shared memories of Andrea and Carol's childhood with them during their trip to the village. Upon seeing her, Alexander and Tara were filled with a mix of gratitude and nostalgia. Lucy had been a bridge to the past, and her visit seemed like a sign that their mothers were still present, even in small details. "Lucy, what a joy to see you," Tara said, hugging her warmly. "What brings you here?" Lucy smiled, looking lovingly around the foundation, noticing how everything in it reflected the love and effort of the siblings. "I just wanted to see how you were doing and to see everything you've achieved. Andrea and Carol would be so proud of you," Lucy replied, with a smile full of nostalgia. "Your mothers always dreamed that you would live a fulfilling life, and I think this is more than they ever dared to imagine." Lucy toured the foundation with Alexander and Tara, admiring every detail they had added in honor of their mothers. Along the hallways were small plaques with phrases from Andrea and Carol, words that inspired them and reminded them daily why they had started this mission. In one of the rooms, Lucy stopped in front of a glass display case where Alexander and Tara had placed the bracelets their mothers had left them, along with a photo of them together in their youth. That corner had become a small sanctuary, a place of honor for the women who, through their sacrifice, had given their children the opportunity to create a better world. Lucy, with tears in her eyes, looked at the siblings. "Andrea and Carol would be so happy to see this, to see how you took their love and turned it into something so beautiful. Sometimes, pain and sacrifices become the foundations of something much bigger than we can imagine." Alexander and Tara exchanged a look full of understanding and gratitude. They both felt that the circle had closed. They had faced the truth, reconciled with their past, and now they were ready to move forward without the weight of secrets, but with their mother's memory always in their hearts. After saying goodbye to Lucy, Alexander and Tara decided to take a break and go for a walk in the nearby park. As they strolled, they reminisced about all the moments they had shared during their search for the truth, the revelations that had marked them, and the times they felt the weight of their story was too much to bear. However, together they had overcome every obstacle, and each step had brought them to a deeper understanding of their mothers and themselves. "Do you realize, Alexander," Tara said, looking toward the horizon, "Andrea and Carol united us in a way that even they couldn't foresee. Everything they did brought us here, and I feel that in the end, they knew this was what we had to do, that this was our purpose." Alexander looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. "I know, Tara. They gave us life, and now we're giving life to their legacy. We've healed our wounds, and that has made it possible for us to help others heal theirs." They both fell silent, enjoying the peace surrounding them. They knew the Foundation's mission would continue long after they were gone, and that their story, a story of love, sacrifice, and redemption, would inspire future generations. That evening, Alexander and Tara returned to the Foundation to close out the day. Before leaving, Alexander stopped in front of the display case with the bracelets and the photo of their mothers. He closed his eyes, and silently, he spoke a few words of thanks. "Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Carol, for your love, for your sacrifice. All of this is for you." Tara hugged him, feeling that those words were also hers. They both knew that, although their mothers were no longer physically with them, their presence would always accompany them. The legacy of Andrea and Carol would continue through the Foundation and in every life Alexander and Tara touched. And though the journey had been arduous, they both felt that every step, every pain, and every revelation had been worth it. They had turned the love of their mothers into an eternal force, a legacy of hope and healing that would live on in every person who came to them seeking comfort. As Alexander and Tara turned off the lights and left the foundation, the memory of their mothers remained alive in their hearts. They knew that, thanks to them, they had found their purpose. Together, they had built something that honored the story of love, sacrifice, and redemption that united them, and that now continued to unite other families. Outside, under the light of the moon, Alexander and Tara held hands and walked in silence, feeling that Andrea and Carol were watching over them with pride from somewhere. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, sacrifice, and redemption. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can all honor the legacy of those who have touched us. Remember, sometimes the scars of the past can become our greatest strength. See you in the next chapter.